Many thanks to Job, Jaren, DayZ Podcast, Taggy's Tag West, Black Knight and Lion Lost for making this video possible. In this video I'm going to cover every single weapon change in DayZ 1.15, including whether Vega is no longer the king of base raiding, how the LAR isn't as strong as you believe it is now, and my picks for the top 5 weapons of 1.15. The changes to fire rates in this patch is by a long shot the biggest change that we've seen to the weapon meta, taking these weapons from 600 RPM up to a godly 900 RPM, basically a 50% buff in damage. The Vega also got this 50% buff, again increasing the damage output by 50%, shredding walls much faster in this patch, but again, this is not the best weapon to do this. Finally, for the RPM changes, the Burstfire M16 got a fire rate increase from 400 to 550 RPM, certainly making its Burstfire mode much more viable in this patch. First of all, the only weapons to have their vertical recoil reduced are the VSS, the AS-Val and the UMP. The VSS and the AS-Val by a huge 60%, where the UMP now has a monster buff of 75% less recoil compared to 1.14. However, the MP5 or SG5K, which by the way had the lowest recoil of any weapon in the previous patch, now has 66% more recoil in this patch, making it the worst SMG when it comes to recoil now. The other recoil changes come in the form of increased stability for weapons such as the SVD now being 50% easier to control, which if we compare these two clips is a noticeable difference. The one on the right is much more stable, as you can see. The VSS, AS-Val, UMP and the FAMAS all received a similar buff to their stability values, making the VSS, AS-Val and UMP absolute laser beams in this patch, especially with the RPM buff of the VSS and the AS-Val. A good way to measure which weapons are best is by the stat that people tend to look at first: damage. Now, due to the RPM changes, damage has changed a buttload in this patch, so looking at the top 5 weapons by damage will give us a really good idea of what has actually changed. So in 5th place, and this may be a surprise to a lot of you here, it's the VSS and the AS-Val, which are essentially the same weapon statistically, pumping out 50% more damage with 50% less vertical recoil and 50% improved stability. Easily the most buffed weapon in 1.15, taking that number 5 spot with 1125 damage per frickin' second. The 4th most powerful weapon in the number 4 spot is a weapon that you're not ready for. I hope you are sitting down for this, because it's the LAR. A weapon that many consider to be the best weapon in DayZ is just less than 100 damage shy of the VSS and the AS-Val when it comes to DPS, and that's not considering how these two weapons accept armor piercing rounds. RIP LAR. The first of the 3 weapons ranking above the LAR is the RPM buffed M4 at 1440 DPS, and even with the RPM buff from 600 to 900, it's still a laser beam with the right attachments. In 2nd place now is the FAMAS, due to the FAMAS getting a sneaky damage buff of 18% in 1.15 that I nearly missed, giving it more damage per shot than the M4 and a very healthy 1612 DPS. 1st place though goes to the Vega, firing buckshot at a monstrous 1860 damage every single frickin' second, but bear in mind that the damage drops off very quickly with buckshot and the pellets spread out quickly too, making it quite unreliable. But this doesn't make a difference when you're shrekking walls when raiding bases, so we're going to rank these 5 weapons against walls too to see which ones are best for raiding now. So again, in 5th place, 214 rounds fired, 10 reloads to take down a wall, is the VSS and the AS-Val, taking 57 seconds to destroy a wooden panel. Again in 4th place is the LAR, spending 132 rounds with 6 reloads to destroy a wooden panel, totaling 38 seconds, taking down a panel an impressive 33% faster than 5th place. Next up is the FAMAS, firing 149 rounds while reloading just 5 times to gank a panel in just 31 seconds, a very good weapon this patch due to its damage and recoil buffs. In 2nd place though, losing the top spot that it had for over a year of being the king of raiding bases, the Vega takes an L with 65 shells, reloading 3 times and destroying a panel in just 21.5 seconds. Which means, as you've probably guessed by now, the best weapon in DayZ for raiding bases is now the M4A1, firing more rounds than the FAMAS at 167, but reloading just twice with its bottomless mag of 60 rounds, and only beating the Vega by just 0.58 seconds at 20.92 seconds to take down a wooden panel. Awesome. There's been a lot of minor weapon changes in this patch too, including how buckshot, slugs and the rubber slugs will now make players go unconscious for 5 seconds longer, from 20 seconds up to 25 seconds at a maximum, but all of the other ammo types in the game are still the same when it comes to unconsciousness times. They are still quite short. As I said earlier, the FAMAS got a buff, the bullet speed was increased by 18%, which also means the damage and the penetration went up by 18% too for this weapon. The devs also added the ability to remove the vision blocking iron sights with the saw, but in sawing one off, it does ruin 10% faster. Now when a suppressor becomes ruined, it will display the muzzle flashes correctly as if you didn't have a suppressor at all, which is a slight nerf to all suppressors in this patch. A sound for switching fire modes was added, which can be heard up to around 20 meters by normal players, but 50 meters by people that pump up their volume to the max. Switching into semi-auto sounds like this, burst fire sounds like this, and full auto sounds like this. It's the same for all of the weapons in DayZ, so yes, you can hear which fire mode somebody is switching into. As you probably noticed, weapons now spawn by default with the semi-auto fire mode selected, so you need to get into the habit of switching fire modes to full auto, as that's the best fire mode most of the time. And finally, which I'm sure you're aware of, there are 2 variants of the AUG that were added, but nonetheless it is a huge weapon change worth knowing, as these 2 weapons are very powerful and I'm sure many people will be using them, which concludes all of the changes to weapons in DayZ patch 1.15. Well done, you are now up to date. Now I do go into more detail on the biggest changes in this patch, which is the RPM and the recoil changes here, which I would highly recommend watching if you want to master what has changed in 1.15. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.